Welcome, everyone. These lights are very bright, so if you're cheering and clapping, make sure to stand up so I can see which one of you are being supportive. Welcome. This is Yahoo on Microsoft Net 3.0 and Microsoft Expression. We forgot to rename it to really cool stuff and really technical stuff from Yahoo. My name is Josh Jacobson. I'm the product manager for Yahoo Messenger on Windows Vista. And soon you'll be talking to Eric Burke, who's senior technical Yahoo, dedicated to this project 100%. And pretty much everybody from our small but talented team is in the audience as well. So you get a double treat here at MIX, where today we're going to talk about why is Yahoo here at all. Also give you a demo of our pre-alpha build. Eric is going to give you WPF secrets revealed, stuff he's learned along the way when we've had to build real applications. Then we'll do Q&A with Eric and myself. And even after that, our team will be available if you want to talk informally. On Wednesday at 10 a.m., a very special session with Frog Design and Yahoo. And Frog Design has been a great partner for us. And they're going to talk with us about the designer-developer workflow. And actually, we're going to show you some things we've never shown before, which are early concepts and prototypes we developed while we were creating this app. So why are we here at all? Why would Yahoo take these talented designers and developers, and instead of having them work on the web or on older versions of Messenger, why are we dedicated to Windows Vista? Why wouldn't we do, like many other companies have done, just take our XP application, make sure it doesn't break OK, or make sure it doesn't break in Vista, and call it a day? There's a reason for that. We believe one size does not fit all. And this is important, especially for Yahoo, in that people don't generally use Yahoo because they have to. They use Yahoo because they want to. There's lots of other choices out there. So if we don't engage and connect with those users and keep them delighted on a regular basis, they'll go somewhere else. And so what does that mean? It's not just about function. It's about really making a wonderful user experience. So especially for Yahoo Messenger, our philosophy is that we deliver the right client for the right person at the right time. So here's our version of Messenger for Windows XP. This is optimized for XP. And what I'm going to show you are versions of Messenger that live and breathe in the operating system that they're supposed to be in. In other words, they don't just run on XP or Mac or Vista. The idea is that they're fully integrated for a native experience in each one of those operating systems. Keep in mind that our users don't just use Messenger real quick and then turn it off. Messenger is often running all day, sometimes all night. So if we're able to hook into all the features of the operating system, that makes our application all that much better. Things like notifications, being able to run in the background quietly. These are all things you have to maintain that's harder in a web page, but it's perfect for Messenger. Here's the version we have for the Macintosh. One thing that's very interesting about the Mac is last year we redesigned the version of Messenger for the Mac. And an interesting thing happened. Based on a redesign alone, not adding new features necessarily, basically just taking the existing UI, which was a little dated, not taking full advantage of the Mac, updating it to integrate with the Mac address book using the Cocoa interface. If you look at our concurrent users, it wasn't just a spike for people who wanted to download the new application. This has been a trend that's growing and growing. And you can see very clearly in this graph, it's based purely on this user experience performance increase. So that taught us a pretty good lesson, which is you can keep fundamental core communication features the same, make sure those work solidly, improve the user experience, and more users will come to Yahoo. And that's important for our business because the more users we have, the better it is for Yahoo. So as developers, this gets a little complicated because now you've got multiple clients on multiple operating systems, and we don't want to be replicating all the work over and over again. So the idea is that we have a Yahoo client platform that supports multiple clients on the desktop. Then we have the Messenger client platform that's built for these core communication features for Messenger. And I showed you the Windows XP client, the Mac OS X client. I'll show you the demo of the Windows Vista client. And the great thing about these platforms that we're developing at Yahoo is in the future, as business needs warrant, we can develop new UIs, either for the same operating systems or for a new one that comes out. Who knows? So now I'll do a quick demo of Yahoo Messenger for Vista. And then after that, I'll turn it over to Eric to tell you what all the technical things were, or some of the more important ones that we did in the demo. And again, just so we're very clear, this isn't just a demo that I'll show you. This is the pre-release software. So what we're doing now is taking what I show you and optimizing it for deployment. So here we have a nice default desktop for Windows Vista. We've got the sidebar on the right, a few of the standard gadgets, and we've got the Yahoo contact list on the left. So far it looks pretty normal and okay. But using WPF, which we've made a real investment in, we can do things that start to make this interface a lot more interesting. So we can resize the contact list. And that's interesting, but why does this really matter? Well, one of the things is Yahoo has a lot of different services that we offer. And if you can go larger or smaller, you get more of a dashboard for your friends to see what they've been up to on the Yahoo network, and maybe in the future other places, rather than just a list of names. But if you actually have some work to do, you could make it just a list of names and call it a day. So besides that, we have something that's a perfect example of how you can have a lot of fun with WPF, but we have to be careful not to get in people's way when they just want to send a text message. So here's our color picker to show to change the color of the skin of your contact list. And you can imagine in the future we would add more colors or more textures, or maybe advertisers would work with us to have something here. So I'll go back to our default just because I like it. That's why it's our default. Let's start a conversation. So this is Tilly, who you may see in the front row. It's not really Tilly, but we'll pretend for now. So one of the things we're working on is when people think of WPF, they think of, ooh, that's like slick new graphics. So what can we do with that? And something our users love, even if they have no technical knowledge at all, they don't care about anything else, but they just love our emoticons. People always say to me, if I just mention I work on Yahoo Messenger, man, you guys have those great smiley faces. They're just the best ones. So we've been doing a lot of design work with Frog to look at what can we do with these smileys or these emoticons. So if Tilly can send me one that's a concept of just what you might be able to do to really express your emotion at that time. We've got the wink emoticon, and that's just a little taste. I mean, we're working on a lot of interesting ones that do actions, and that one's maybe a little big. We may tone it down a little bit. It was too fun to not try it. So another thing is you'll notice I click call, and in this case I click the call button, and you may hear some ringing over there. I don't know. This is where it's revealed that Tilly is actually a bald engineer in the front row. And what we have here is voice visualization. And again, taking the fact that when people buy a new Vista computer, they're not just thinking, oh, well, I just got this new computer and I'll just load some apps on it. They're thinking, man, I just spent a lot of money on a new computer, and it's got this nice new screen. Like, what apps are going to deliver for me on getting this nice piece of hardware? And so doing things like voice visualization, where in this case my voice is purple and Tilly's voice is white, these are things that we do to help engage the user, but also this has a real use in that you can see if this visualization is working, that your voice is going through, and you can see that Tilly's voice is coming through. So maybe you could check if your speakers aren't working or something like that. Another thing people ask us for, we do a lot of user research at Yahoo, and they say, well, I don't really know what features I want, but you know, when my son is off at college or something like that, I want to just feel like I'm there with him. And so a small touch we do with that, again, is keeping one window for all the functions and keeping that nice avatar at the top. But another thing is we thought about what existing features can we optimize to make it more intimate. So we call this show and tell. So in this case, I click the share button, and I click share photos. And what's happening here is we're using two sources. We're using the Vista desktop search, which keeps an index of your latest photos on your computer, whether or not you uploaded them with your camera, downloaded them from the internet, or maybe created them yourself. And it's going out to the Yahoo network. And here it sees that I have a Flickr account. And it's showing me the most recent photos I've uploaded to Flickr, because generally people want to share those photos they've touched most recently. So what I can do here is this is a picker. So I can pick a bunch of photos from my desktop. I can pick a few from Flickr. When I click, let's see, try some more. When I click done, those photos are actually sent to Tilly. And then she sees what I see, and we can both drive or let one of us drive. And to be fully immersive, we can go full screen, take advantage of that nice new LCD you got. And keep in mind, we can also maintain this voice conversation while we're doing this. So this is a great example of just packaging existing features with a new user experience. And people have just responded really well to this. They seem to love it. Let's go back. So I'll show a couple other things here. One of the other things we've been working on is pretty straightforward in that Internet Explorer 7 and Firefox have really popularized tabs. So now general people, probably everyone here in the room has known about tabs forever, but someone who just downloads IE7, they may have not known about tabs before, and we're getting requests for tabs from people that may not have even known about it in the past. So in this case, while I'm still having a conversation with Tilly, maybe I'll open a couple other conversations. The screen starts to get a little cluttered. What I can do is just drag two windows together. When I release the mouse, those two are in tabs. We can do the same here. And now all three are in a tabbed interface. And of course, you can have it default so that you do tabs from the beginning. I can drag these tabs back out, close them out. Now that Tilly and I have had a very engaging conversation, I'm ready to get back to work. So goodbye, Tilly. I'm sorry. But now Tilly, if you notice in the contact list, she's back to being in this long list of my friends. And Tilly is one of my best friends, so I don't want to just keep her in this list just like everybody else. So you notice on this sidebar, we're taking advantage of the Vista, or the Windows sidebar, and we've developed a gadget. And what you can do, it would have been easy to just say, well, if it's a gadget, why don't we just recreate the whole contact list and make the text really small and just shove it in there? But we may do that. But the idea was we're taking a whole new stab at this UI. We're trying new things. We're having fun. We're innovating. What would we do that would be different, that you wouldn't want in your contact list? And the idea here is that you just drag one person over, and now you just see what Tilly's up to. You see her status. You see whether or not she's online or offline. And so you can close everything else. You can be using Word. And you can always just check on the sidebar to see your favorite friends. And again, the great thing about gadgets is you can create multiple gadgets. So you could have gadgets that are this size all along your sidebar. You could drag them to the desktop. And you could add more people to this sidebar gadget if you wanted. So I'll show you one final thing from the demo. This is what we call automatic groups. So what happens a lot is people will have one friend that has Yahoo Messenger. And that friend will say, oh, you should get on it and try it out. And so they may have a conversation, but maybe that friend's not very reliable and is never online, and that's kind of the end of it. And they just stop using Messenger. And they don't even realize who else of their friends is on. So Yahoo's doing automatic groups, which takes existing affiliations that you have, in this case fantasy football, which I'll show you, and it automatically adds those users to your contact list. But again, if you're stuck in a contact list as a group, you're just kind of given this text header, and everyone else just looks the same. But this is fantasy football. This isn't just another list of contacts. So what I did, I just dragged that group out from the contact list. And again, using WPF, we can have a little fun. This is fantasy football. These are people I know. During game time, I can send them instant messages. I got a better score than you. Things are going well for me or not. And we're going to be doing this for different groups along the way throughout Yahoo. So that's that's a quick overview of our features for Yahoo Messenger for Windows Vista. At the end, I'll give you a website where you can put in your email address to get notified the second it's ready. And with that, I'm going to turn this over to Eric Burke, our senior technical Yahoo, to tell you about the lessons he's learned as he's actually been developing this. And also, it's not just him, it's our whole team have been learning, and he'll be presenting them to you today. Thank you.
Yeah, that is fine. Okay, can you guys hear me all right? Okay. So, quick overview. There's a number of topics I want to cover. Most of it's going to be pretty technical, but I'm going to touch on the developer designer workflow a little bit, but also I'm going to dive pretty deep in some of the technical stuff as well. So, the first thing I tell people when they're getting started with WPF is you should really make heavy use of the forums and blogs that are out there. The Microsoft folks are very good about blogging, as is the community. The WPF community is still relatively small relative to things like Windows Forums and ASP.NET, things like that. So take advantage, and if you need to ask a question in a forum, provide code that reproduces your issue, because it makes people a lot more willing to help you. If they can just load something, see it, they might know the answer right away. One expectation you should set is you're going to refactor your code a lot for up to 6 months. The story that I always share is my first application, I did it, I thought it was great. I did another application, and I realized my first one was terrible. Then I did another one, and I realized the first two were terrible. And it took me till the My Yahoo demo at the MIX conference last year where I finally said, okay, I kind of get it now. And even the stuff that I did then, I look back now, and I realize that half of it I didn't know what I was talking about. So you expect to do a lot of refactoring. One thing I would suggest is everybody wants to write a photo viewer or an RSS reader or a sidebar. Do it, because you can leverage all the design that's out there. Me, I'm an engineer. I'm terrible at design. So if you look at a design and try to reproduce it, then all of a sudden you're diving into things that you really didn't know how to do at first, and you have this template to work with. So definitely worth your time there, because most people don't have access to a designer who can go whip up some cool thing for you to go demo. Try to use everything in the SDK. HTML circa 1996, Blink, Strike, Marquee, whatever you can throw in there just to see how it works. It's worth it. And then keep in mind that this is 1.0 software. There are bugs that obviously got triaged out and are still in the current bits, and there are features that got pushed off till later. So you're going to look at it and go, oh, why don't they have this feature? Well, it's coming. It's just not in 1.0. So just be aware of that when you're working with this. Think code first. And the reason I say that, and obviously this isn't aimed at the designers, but for engineers, think code first, because then you see what's going on under the hood. It's too easy to write the markup and not realize that actually does translate into code, and then all of a sudden you're into a problem and you're really not sure what's happening behind the scenes. So if you dig around in the compiler's files, they have this .g.cs extension. Look in there. You can see some of the things that the compiler generates on your behalf when you do markup. Charles Petzold has an excellent book where he does the code first approach, and then the XAML is the second half of the book. It's worth the read because he does a good job of teaching the nitty-gritty. And Rob from Microsoft, and his blog is writing a XAML to code converter, which you'll be able to play with and put some XAML in, see what the code looks like, and you start to get a feel for it. There's an application model that the Microsoft folks, specifically the Blend team, talks about, and that's the model view model. So the model part is sort of developer owned. It's a lot of application logic, raw data, unmanaged code. It's all code, and it's a foundation for the application to run on. And then you have the view, which is owned by the designer. It's all the UI stuff, generally in XAML, generally all toolable with Blend or Cider, the other tools that Microsoft provides. But then you have this thing in the middle called the view model, which is sort of this layer that kind of hooks up the model with the view. And so when you get into data binding, a lot of the things that you're going to build in the model, raw data, don't align themselves well with data binding. So you write this layer in the middle, which kind of does the data translation for you and gives the UI and the designer a real nice model for data binding that they can work with, and it keeps the designer on track, running as fast as they can, and keeps the model itself very clean. And so you put a lot of your business logic. This is sort of like similar to the business logic layer in the traditional 3-tier model. So you've heard a lot about the workflow between developers and designers, and we've heard this from Microsoft for 3 years now. How do we do it? And this is how we've done it, and it's worked well for us because it's highly iterative, and we've been able to hone it over time. But basically, when we start an app, the developer is going to write the application at first because we have to build out the model, and we have to build out some of the view model, and we need to get something out there, and it's usually ugly and blocky. The designer is going to take that, apply some styling, using all the tools, and requesting changes, saying, hey, I need something to bind to. You need to give me this. And at the same time, building prototypes, things that aren't supported yet in the application that they need to go off and figure out. And then the developer is going to take all that, integrate it all back in, and then lather, rinse, repeat. And what's happened on our project so far is that initial integration was fairly painful because we were on a time crunch and everybody was running as fast as they could. And so that first integration was painful, and then every time we got another rev of changes back from the designers, there was a lot of things that all we had to do was do a diff on a couple files, merge them back in, and we were done. And so this kind of a model lends itself well to moving quickly, but letting everybody nobody's blocked. Part of this is the designers really need to be using the tools. And they generally don't want to have to learn how to write XAML by hand, just like they don't want to write HTML by hand necessarily. So because it's slow. But at the same time, we have to make sure our project loads in Blend, which up until now, which with the first release, has been difficult because the tool just didn't support some of the things that we needed it to support. You can factor your code using user controls and some helper projects, and that allows you to load a specific portion of your whole project by itself, and that helps. Oops. So the whole tool experience is actually very good for keeping the project in a state where it doesn't get out of hand and doesn't tip too far to the developer side or the designer side. Now, one of the things that Microsoft got a lot of feedback on at first was, hey, where are my transparent windows? I mean, everybody with all this cool new technology, at first, I couldn't put a irregularly shaped transparent window on the desktop without using some hardcore interop. And so there's a lot of feedback, and Microsoft said, okay, we're going to do this, but beware, it's not going to perform very well. And we didn't listen. We said, we don't care, we just want to do it. And so, of course, we did it, and then it didn't perform, and we asked them why. And so here's why. So when you render a window with no transparency, a typical standard window, what happens is WPF renders using DirectX, which is all hardware accelerated, and on XP it draws right to the screen, and on Vista it draws to the shared surface that the desktop window manager manages for you. And that's all great. And that's the core experience for WPF. Now in XP, when you turn transparency on, what happens is it needs to call update layered window with this DC from Win32 land. The problem is Direct3D won't give you back a DC if you're using transparency. So WPF goes, well, I can't hardware accelerate, I'm going to do software. So that's bad because you're losing all the advantage. On Vista, you have a problem that's slightly different. The Direct3D says, okay, fine, here's your DC back that has transparency, so you can use hardware acceleration. But now, on Vista, the GDI layer, which is the update layer window, is software emulated. So so all of my bits are on my video card, and I have to do everything using main memory, so I have to move all the bits from the video card back to main memory, which can be really slow. So I'm going to show you a quick demo of this in action on this machine. Okay, so I've created two windows. You might recognize this example. Petzold made this example. It's just this basic thing. This is an opaque window, no transparency. It animates pretty well, and you see a lag. That's a different problem, but you see the teapot is animating just fine. Now I have this layered window, and you can see the teapot's already moving slower. Now when I animate it, uh-oh. And that's the fact that as the window gets bigger, it's trying to send all those bits every frame back across the bus to main memory, and it just can't do it. You can see my mouse isn't even responsive, right? So that's a problem. So we can draw some conclusions with this. On XP, if you have a real complex scene like 3D graphics, that's going to kill your performance using transparent windows. On Vista, it's the speed of the system bus, but it's also the large windows. And large, as you can see, large really isn't large. They have to be really small to get any kind of performance and not changing a lot in order to not see degradation. There are some workarounds. One thing you can do is use an opaque window, but to make it irregularly shaped, use Win32, the GDI stuff, to cut out a region. And we had to do this all along in Win32 for years. And it works well. You don't get transparency, but you get that irregularly shaped window, which is what you want. You can use overlapped windows and sort of an owner relationship to create the illusion of a non-rectangular window. So where you have a main window and then you have these smaller transparent or partially transparent windows that are sort of overlapped on it and move with it, and when the big one resizes, they move. That works pretty well because you're keeping those transparent windows nice and small. The added advantage to that is when you maximize, you can move those windows in so that they're not off the screen or forcing the main window to stay on this to have a margin. You can also use the pop-up class, which is part of WPF. There's a caveat there. It always wants to stay on top, so then if you obscure the main window, the pop-up's still going to be on top. It's not going to look right. It also forces itself to stay on screen, so as you drag the window over to the side, it's going to keep moving in and lose the relationship that you set up in the first place. So use with caution. So I'll show you a quick demo of just sort of, it's a real rudimentary demo of what we did, but so what you can see is I have this glass window, and I've overlapped these windows with my avatar. This one on the top has no background at all. It's just sort of floating in space, but this is how we achieve the effect of the avatar in the main window. And it serves its purpose. And as I resize, there are some bugs where the resize events don't come across as fast, but and then your display whacks out on you. So you get the point. You can see the effect we were going for. All right. So the window, on the window transparency side, the bottom line is use with caution because they won't perform as you get complex scenes, and they won't perform as you get large windows. So use with caution. And one thing I alluded to earlier was user controls. And those of you who come from the Windows Forms world, you're probably familiar with this. One of the problems that happens with markup, and this is true in the HTML world too, is that the file size gets unwieldy really quickly. I mean, the conversation window that you saw Josh demo, at one point it was 5,000 lines long, and the functionality was not even anywhere near anything we were going to release. So it's really hard to maintain that. It's hard to find things, and the tools just choke because you have all these moving parts inside one file, and they just don't know what to do. So a user control really acts as a custom, sort of a black box that is different than a custom control in that this isn't meant to be redeployed or reused or shared among projects necessarily. It's going to be used to encapsulate specific functionality in your current project. So it allows you to build faster. It allows you to lay your UI out top down with placeholders saying, I'm going to put a user control here. And you can work on everything else, and that can just remain some black rectangle, and you don't really care. And you're not forced to have to compensate for that in your layout until you want to just fill in the content of it. It can live in a separate project if you want it to. We have a number of those that do. They're smaller and they're encapsulated, so the tools generally can work with them very well. And it makes the iterating and testing of these controls much, much easier, because what I've done in the past is I'll just go off, I'll just completely get out of my project and go work on a user control by itself with either fake data or no data, just to get it up and running. And the iteration there is the rebuild and run is very fast, and you can do this in Blend as well. And it makes life easier on the designers. They can choose to bring up, if they want to bring up one specific portion of the application and you've created a user control for it, they just bring that up and they can work purely in that, and they don't have to worry about some live application running inside of Blend and how do I get it into a state where I need it. You just bring this user control up. So here's a screenshot of sort of our conversation window today, and the things that I've highlighted are things that are user controls in our project. So there's the avatar and status, there's that little menu bar with the text call video share, and then the main area is actually nested user controls. So you see the yellow is the outer one, and the pink and the blue are user controls that we've created that get nested inside of there. And that way, as we change modes, the main user control just modifies the main layout of its client area, and then the individual user controls actually provide the functionality of the text message area or the voice visualization or the share or anything like that. So it's made life a lot easier, and we're still not fully user controlized, but we're getting to the point where the tools are starting to be really useful for us, and we're not having to go and do a lot of things by hand. So in general, think about your UI from the top down as much as you can, and get an idea for where should I put user controls, and they can still talk to one another. And you might have to set up a data context or two and do a little more work than you ordinarily would, but it's well worth that little effort. One thing that WPF introduced, one of the most powerful controls is the items control, and these are things like list boxes and combo boxes, anything where you have a list of data and you want to display it to the user in some form. The one thing that items controls do by default is something called virtualization. So you run into a situation where you're retrieving 1 million records from the database, and you shove them into a list box. And if you created a list box item for every one of those pieces of data, your machine would grind to a halt, it would probably crash, it would be really bad. So what the items controls do is they create a physical representation for only the items that are visible. And so if the list box is only 20 items high, you're going to get 20, you're going to use the memory for 20 items, and that's it. The rest of the data is just data, it's not actual physical items. The default behavior of items control uses a class called the virtualizing stack panel, which is basically a fancy way of saying a stack panel vertically or horizontally, which only creates things that you can see. And as you scroll the list, the virtualizing panel is smart enough to say, oh, this item's going away, I'm going to throw it out, and this item's coming into view, I better create a visual for it. And that's the default behavior of list boxes, and if you ever snoop inside the tree, you'll see that. The problem is, you don't always want a stack panel. You saw our contact list, where it's sort of, as Josh resized the window, it just started wrapping the contacts based on the amount of space you had. So if you want to use a wrap panel or a grid, you get no virtualization, because the only thing that is provided in the .NET framework is the stack panel. The solution to that is to write your own panel. And Dan from Microsoft, when he was working on Max, wrote a great example in 4 parts on how to write a virtualizing tile panel, which is similar to the wrap panel. And it's a great starting point, because it shows you all the different things that you need to do. And it's not easy, but if you want that great user experience, it's something that you're probably going to have to do at some point. The second problem is if you want to group data. I mean, you saw we had groups, and everybody wants to group their data or make it hierarchical or something like that. The problem is the view of the list box treats each group as a single item, and it knows nothing about the contents of that group. So it just goes, okay, group, here you go, make yourself. And the group goes, I'm 1 million lines long, and it goes, okay. And so then you're back to the problem of using too much memory. Yeah, your performance is going to degrade, etc. The solution is to write a custom collection view subclass that you're going to use instead of the default that the list box is going to provide you. And it's very easy to replace the default list collection view. It's one call. And because you own it, you can make it play nicely with virtualization. You can have it do whatever you want. And it's not trivial. It took a lot of iteration, but once we got it done, now we own all the parts. We own the panel, we own the view, and so we can make them play very nicely with one another. And then you can start, if you need to, you can put application logic in there, things that you know about the application that may never happen. You can plan for that and then make your performance better. So that's items controls. And the reason I point this out is because items controls become just an integral part of your application because you use them everywhere, even without realizing it. List boxes, combo boxes, anything where you're selecting one of many or just trying to display a set of data, you're going to be using this. Interop is another, I alluded to before, is another category where it applies in the real world much more than it applies in the just learning WPF world. So in every organization, you have legacy code that you have to use or you don't want to throw it out because there's tons of time and effort behind it. Or maybe you have some cross-platform code that is only C++ that you have to use. And that's our case where you saw Josh's initial slide where we have this layer underneath which we're running as a client platform for Mac, Win32, Vista, all that. This is code that we have to use because we don't want to replicate that effort in our project. There's functionality that doesn't exist in WPF that you want to use, that you know about from Win32 land. Or you have this Windows Forms app, and you don't want to throw it out and restart it. You just want to visualize some data in one piece of it. You want to stick a WPF control in there. This is where you need interop. Or vice versa. If you want to write a WPF application, but you have this Windows Forms control that's awesome that you built, and you want to stick it in there, then you're going to need some sort of interop. Or if you want to use a existing non-WPF third-party control such as Flash. If you want to embed Flash or something like that, you need to do interop. So the first part of interop that we've done is manage C++. And what this has done for us, this has done more for us than anything else in terms of using our cross-platform stuff because our client platform guys were nice enough to wrap up all their C++ into a managed C++ DLL, and they provided us a .NET interface to all their stuff. So now I don't have to sit there and figure out how do I call this and this and that. I just call, I'm writing .NET code, and under the hood, this managed C++ DLL is doing all the real work. And this allows us we can subclass these .NET classes. They're just .NET classes. We can data bind directly to them because they've set up all the property change notifications. So it really allows us on the application side to move a lot faster while still leveraging all this work that's being done under the hood to manage our low-level client platform code. And like I say, it communicates with the underlying managed code and really makes life a lot easier. So if there's anything that you have that's legacy, I highly recommend taking a look at how do I wrap it with .NET and repackage it for the application so that the application doesn't have to worry about it and they can just go off and write the .NET code that they love to write and they move so fast on. Pinvoke is something, it's a fancy term for calling C++ functions from .NET. Maybe you have Win32 calls that you need to make. We use desktop window manager calls, shell execute if you want to pop up the default browser, window long, anything like that. You're going to have to write pinvoke signatures or any of your legacy C++ libraries that aren't wrapped. There is a site out there that shows you the signatures that you need for a lot of the common libraries. Adam Nathan is literally the guy who wrote the book on interop. So he started this site, but he also writes a blog. He has a multi-volume set of books for this kind of stuff. Really good stuff. And your signature is going to look something like that if you're writing code. You've probably seen it if you've done anything like this. It's one of these things where it's easy to mess this up. And so that's why I say try not to do this as much as possible because it isn't as trivial as it may seem. Interoping with Windows Forms, I alluded to earlier. You can host Windows Forms controls in WPF. There's a control called Windows Forms Host that is a WPF element that just hosts Windows Forms content for you. And you can use a property map to translate property values between Windows Forms and WPF so that you're not having to do a lot of bookkeeping. Common usage is the web browser control. There is no web browser control in WPF. The best thing to do is host a Windows Forms web browser control. And the way you do that is with Windows Forms host. And then you stick a Windows Forms web browser in there, and then you go. The flip side of that is hosting WPF content as an island inside Windows Forms. There's something called an element host that allows you to host that content, which is a Windows Forms control, host Windows Presentation Foundation content. Again, use the property map to go back and forth with property values. ActiveX is another way that you may want to go if you have third-party controls. There's a Windows Forms control called AX host. So now we have this dual-level interop where you're using a AX host Windows Forms control in WPF, and that AX host is actually turning around and calling all the COM interfaces that it needs to call, and OLE, and everything that you don't want to do to get your stuff done. And so you want to build a managed wrapper using AX host. The one option is to just add a reference to your ActiveX control in Visual Studio, and it does everything for you. That's great. The problem there is you don't get strong naming, and you don't have any control over what it generates, and it generates a lot of stuff. So the option 2 is to go on the command line and run this aximp.exe, which is really what Visual Studio is doing. Run it manually, and you can do all sorts of stuff that you want to do, and then you have a C# file after that you add to your project, and you can strip it down, you can instrument it, you can do whatever you want, and you have much more control. So beware that windowed controls like Flash become a black box in your WPF app, so if you need to do any transparency, you're not going to be able to do it. But if you have a windowless control, like if you have a control that does phone communications, for instance, that's great. You can just use it as is, and you won't ever know the difference from your application. So the next topic, data binding, is sort of the power of WPF. And one of the things that I've had to do from going from the Win32 world to the WPF world is how do I make the app more data-driven? Because even apps that you never would think could be data-driven can be data-driven. So the way you do it is you structure your data to facilitate the binding to happen. And you may not be able to do that on the raw data. Maybe it's a database, maybe it's existing legacy stuff that provides you data. But you craft your view model layer in the middle to add these transforms of the data or helper properties or methods to the view model layer. So a good example is the display text in Yahoo Messenger. There's all sorts of options where you can say, I want to see the buddy's ID. No, I want to see his nickname. No, I want to see his full name. Well, if you try to put that logic in the UI, it would get overloaded. The designer would have to know application logic requirements, and you have all this logic in the UI that you don't want. But in the view model layer, all we had to do was say buddy.displayText as a property that the UI binds to, and inside there, the display text property just says, well, what's the user's setting for what they want to see? Is it the ID? Okay, here's the ID. Is it the nickname? And if the user ever changes that, a notification bubbles up and the UI just changes. And so now the designer just puts in display text and they move on. And then on our side, if the application requirements change or if new features are added, we change it. The designer doesn't need to know. All they need to know is display text. And so this is one of those things where you'll be refactoring your code over and over again, and then one day it'll just click, and you'll go, oh, that's how you do it. And you'll start moving a lot faster. Excuse me. And you can subclass standard collections that are provided with the .NET framework to add helpers. So in our buddy collection, we added a this accessor with a string, which is instead of an integer, which I can just say, give me buddy collection of Tilly, and it'll return me an object. So you can add extensions as opposed to writing your own collections. There's 3 things in data binding where the UI needs to be notified that something's changed. One way to do it is using this iNotify property changed interface. Most binding sources on properties are going to use this. And you can use this for regular old properties. A dependency property is needed when the property itself is a binding target or is animated. So if you want to set a property's value based on a data binding, it has to be a dependency property. And there's things that happen under the hood between bindings and dependency properties that make all the magic happen. So as long as you do this, and they're not much more heavyweight than a regular property. It's just you don't want to overuse them because they can get out of control if you don't need them. And then the final one is I notify collection change, which is basically the same thing as property change notifications, but it's for collections. WPF provides you observable collection, which supports all these change notifications. This is the class that you're going to use 99% of the time. So one thing that everybody does is work with XML data from the cloud or from your local machine, configuration settings. And WPF does a great job of providing you a data provider that just handles XML data. The problem with that is you have to use XPath over and over again to find what you want, and it's just a lot of code, and it gets really unwieldy. You can't necessarily error check it very well. But what XML Serializer does is it takes this XML stream and deserializes it into first-class .NET objects. And once you have those and you have the code for those, you can modify them to, you can stick extra logic in there, you can do lots of error checking, and you can really, it gives you the power of an object that gets populated automatically from XML data. So you don't really have to write that code, you're just using this XML Serializer class. There is a tool in the SDK called XSD, and what you can do is you can generate C# classes for you from either schema or raw XML data. So if you have raw XML data and you don't have the schema for it, you can still point XSD at it, and it'll do a pretty good job of creating a class. And then once you have that class, you can go in and tweak it however you want, add more properties, change the way it does arrays. You can do lots of things. But the beauty of it is once these objects are populated, you bind directly to these objects. All the notifications are there if you add them, and you're done. So one thing we've done is we've taken all the Yahoo search APIs, and we've used the XML Serializer to give us first-class objects. So the search that you saw Josh do on the photos, we have a whole set of classes to support things like Flickr and the desktop search and Yahoo Photos and other search results. So whatever we want to search for, they get automatically run through the serializer and get sent back as a list of objects that UI can bind to. Then the designers know that they don't have to use XPath. They just need to know what's this property called. Is it the URL property? They bind to it and go. And I say the XML serializer is often your friend because there are times when it makes sense to use XPath if you're only doing one thing, for instance, or if you're doing very simple binding to XML data and you don't really care about error checking, you don't really care about keeping the data around that you need to access, that's fine. So you don't always have to do this, but a lot of times you'll want to. Collection view source is an object that WPF provides, which basically gives you data navigation. And you're probably familiar with this in ADO or any of the database stuff. There's the notion of a current item. You can sort and group, and you can bind to this navigator. You can bind list boxes. You can bind a text box to the selected item or the current item. And just by changing the current item or sorting or grouping, everybody gets notified about updates. So that's the collection view source is a nice way, and we use that in our contact list for the sorting and the grouping. We set up a collection view source. We point it at a flat list of buddy items, and we say, hey, we want you to sort by the buddy ID, and we want you to group by the group name, and then sort alphabetically inside there. And it goes, oh, okay. And it just provides us the right groups back to the list box, and all the items controls work nicely with the collection view source. And there's even logic inside WPF special casing a lot of this stuff. So they all work very well together, and that was intentional. Attached properties are something where it's a new functionality in the application world, but it's really not a new concept per se. So you want to set properties on items of a type other than the type that defines it. So the common usage is layout. So either a dock panel or a grid maybe hosts 10 children, and you want to tell each child, hey, you go in row 0, column 1. You go in row 2, column 2. And you stick these properties on the children. The children don't know what to do with them. They just say, oh, okay. But when it comes time for layout, the grid just goes through the children and says, okay, what's your row, what's your column, what's your row, what's your column. And it's really the grid that defines these properties and uses them, but you're attaching them to something else. And what that allows you to do is extend the functionality of something without subclassing it. You really don't want to subclass things because it doesn't scale. So you can imagine if you have 3 different things that you have 3 different sets of functionality that you need to add to a button, you're not going to make 3 different subclasses, and you're not going to subclass every possible thing that you could add to a panel, especially if you can't. If it's a third-party control, maybe you can't subclass it. So it allows you to just stick extra functionality, along for the ride, and it'll get used when it needs to get used. Technically, you don't need attached properties. You can do this purely in code without them by creating helper classes that maintain all the state for you. But this allows you to do things in XAML. So when the designer comes along and says, especially things like row and column, they don't want to have to rely on someone who's writing code and maybe has to modify it. They just want to say, hey, row 0, column 0, go. And so this is the missing piece that allows the XAML to work with this kind of functionality. And what you'll find as you go through, you want helper functionality, you'll keep coming back to attached properties because they're so powerful. My last section is just other tidbits that didn't really fit in some of the other sections. One thing is a merged resource dictionary. It's sort of the equivalent to pound include, because what will happen is just like a regular UI XAML file, a resource dictionary is a XAML file, and if you put every resource known to man in your project in one file, you're never going to be able to work with it. And so it allows you to use multiple XAML files that can be anywhere in one master dictionary, and allows you to maintain these very easily. And you can share them too. So you put them in a shared area of your source tree, and maybe you have one designer who's in charge of making your company-wide styles for buttons and scroll bars and everything. And if they decide that today it's going to be blue instead of green, you came into work, you downloaded the latest source, and all of a sudden your application is green, and you didn't have to do anything. This is a real good thing for us with Frog, because when we would get prototypes back, Frog did a great job of keeping everything separate. We would get the functionality, and then we would get a bunch of resource dictionaries. And so I would just take the resource dictionary styles and diff them with ours and say, oh, this changed, this is new, merge that in, and then I would integrate the code, and lo and behold, it would just all kind of work. And as new styles came up, all we had to do was replace styles inside these files, and we ran with it. WPF has a command framework, which is really powerful because it allows you to encapsulate functionality. You've seen tons of command architectures, I'm sure, where you have a command manager and you have commands, and they all do one little thing, and you can tack them onto a button. And it supports keyboard accessibility via input bindings. But the power in the commands in WPF is that once the commands are there, it allows the developer or the designer to add more command entry points more easily. So if the designer decides that now we need a menu item and a button and a checkbox, and they all need to run this command, they just add it in the XAML and they're done. Or if the developer says, I have functionality that I need to call from code, maybe we'll just make a command out of it and call it. That way it can be used anywhere. But the nice thing is it works across classes and across assemblies, and it bubbles up the tree just like an input event, like a mouse click or a keyboard entry would. And so what that allows you to do is you can have a whole one assembly which is separate from your project, which is just a bunch of commands. And WPF provides some editing commands such as cut, copy, paste. Those are all part of WPF already. All you have to do is write the handler for it and you're done. Application commands such as close, and there's a lot that are built in. Navigation commands for back and forward, things like that. And so that's already built into the framework, and you can use them in your app just by writing one function to handle the command. And it doesn't burden the designers with specific function names. They don't have to go button click equals on my button clicked and hope that you wrote the code and maybe it'll work. By writing the command, if there's a sort of a master manifest that you've given them of commands, they can just use those commands and go. There are a number of tools and resources out there that I think you'll find useful, you'll want to use. One is, you've probably seen XAMLpad, these lightweight WYSIWYG XAML editors. There's a few others out there. XAMLpad X is a good one. It gives you some control styles, default styles. Kazaml, XAML Cruncher is an online thing that Charles Petzold provides. There's no code. You can only put XAML in there, but it gives you a real a real easy way to do UI testing, UI building. If you need to see what something's going to look like, you just paste it in there and go. Helps you learn how to do tricks too. And it's great for sending a reproduction to others that you have a question for, because you can just send them this XAML snippet and say, load this in XAMLpad, go. And they can look at it and it comes right up. So it makes you move more quickly and be collaborative in the process. You've seen Expression Blend from Microsoft. It's a real powerful tool, but you don't have to use everything. So for the designer can build prototypes, individual styles, or they can go into the full application and build the whole UI and do all the animations and everything. So the designer can use it for a playground or for the real application. The developer, the way I use it and the way some of the other guys I know use it, is we'll pull up Blend to do quick styling and templating where we didn't want to actually write it by hand because we weren't sure exactly how we wanted to do it. Blend provides a better interface to do that. And also to test user controls. So like I was saying before, you load it in by itself as opposed to loading your whole project, and you test it in there, you go real fast, and then once it's done, you move it back into your main project. It allows you to use multiple source files, code, complex projects. It's a real powerful tool. And it's available in the box that we got here today, so that's pretty cool. Snoop is a tool that fell out of the Blend team's need to reduce their element count. So one thing that you'll notice with WPF is when you go to look at the visual tree, all of a sudden you're 100 levels deep and you don't know how you got there. Border grid, border grid, border grid, content, and you need to get rid of some of that stuff because it's just taking up memory and not doing anything for you. So what Snoop is it's a SPY++ for WPF. It shows you the visual tree on one side and a list of properties and values on the other. It flashes when things change, so if you just want to watch your application run, you'll see changes. You can click on things in your application, and it'll highlight those in the visual tree, and you can inspect, and you can see exactly what's going on when you put a data template inside a style, what really happens, what really gets created. And there are times when we have no clue what's going on, and then you bring up Snoop, and you look at it, and it's apparent to you immediately what happened. So you can magnify the UI, so when you put it in magnify mode, you just drag it around and it zooms it way up. And because everything is vectored, except for images, of course, you can see everything you can see all the little details and maybe something's going wrong. You can also inspect events that are happening in the system and data binding errors. So if you do a binding and it didn't work, it gets highlighted in red. And you go, oh, something's wrong with that. And you go right back to your code and you can see more quickly what happened. And there's an URL there. Pete Blois is here. He's wandering around somewhere. But this is his site, and you can get it from there. It's really a really good tool. .NET Reflector is another great tool. It's a .NET tool. It's not necessarily WPF, but basically allows you to dig into the disassembly for .NET. So if you want to, you can dig through all the private interfaces and everything. But you can say disassemble this function, and it'll show you what the code looks like. And it's not always perfectly readable, but it's pretty good. You can see the logic and you can see what's going on. And this is great for when something's happening under the hood that you don't know exactly what's going on. You look at this and you go, oh, I see what's going on. Now I can write my code to handle what's going on under the hood. And they do have a XAML resource viewer, so when the compiler spits out these binary files, it will unbinarize them and show you what it really looks like. So the application, the add-ins are at this website. Really good, really powerful. And the .NET framework is intentionally not obfuscated. So there are these tools that will obfuscate the byte code so you can't read it. The .NET framework is intentionally not obfuscated so that you can read the code. So right now, Josh is going to come back and we'll do Q&A a little bit. But like Josh said, the rest of our team is here, and we're going to mill around afterward, or in here, out there, wherever, for more questions. Please sign up for the beta. You can put your email address in, and we'll notify you when something's downloadable. Our session with Frog is going to be Wednesday morning in Palazzo M, so that's good. And you definitely want to check that out because you'll get a lot of the developer designer workflow stuff in that. We have a blog on the Messenger team. I have a personal blog that I try to keep up on in terms of putting out more things like this, tips and tricks, things that I learn. And feel free to contact me if you have questions or just want to chat WPF. So I think that is it. Yeah, so we'll go to Q&A. I'll leave this up for now so you guys can copy this down. Questions? Yeah, I think there's a microphone here if you want to come up. That way it gets on the video.
Hi, yeah, I've got a question about animation.
Uh-huh.
Using animation, like for example, especially the wrap panel display. I'm a designer. I kind of understand your static designs, like your football helmets clashing. But when you're dynamic, you change from a list view to a wrap panel. How do you go about that, and how do you?
So there's a number of things out on the web that do this, but there's an event called Layout Updated, which a panel receives when its layout is updating. And what you can do is, basically, the trick is, the child's already at the new point. Move it back to the old point and animate it to the new point. And so when the layout gets updated, you see where all the new positions are, and if you need to animate them, you move them back to where they were if they changed. And then you have to do some bookkeeping to keep track of where they used to be. You put them back there, and then you move them. So
is there a way of customizing the way it animates between
yes.
the two?
So this is code that we've written, and inside this code, we control the behavior. And right now, it's just straight line. But you can make it whatever animation you want. If you have this fancy animation someone wrote, or if you want to change the acceleration, deceleration, you can do it all. It's actually C# code. So what you would have to do is work with a developer to generate this code for you. Okay. But once you've done that, if they do it right, they could parameterize it, and you could set these values from XAML. So you could say, animation acceleration is this, and then they just take those properties and map them to what really has to happen under the hood. So you have to work with someone to provide you the right interfaces.
Okay. Fine. Thank you.
Sure.
Cool. Well, thank you guys very much. We had a good time, and we'll see you maybe Wednesday morning. Thank you.